Okay, colleagues, thanks. Good evening. So I was asked to discuss a stakeholder perspective on these important questions. And I'm pleased to be here with the University of the West Indies colleagues this evening because there's a series of important questions we have to answer. Vanas raised a critical one earlier on. Can we really say, what right have we got to say that resort development of any kind could resolve the serious underlying problems before us? Now, I have been taking a particular approach to that question. And that approach is rooted in my professional training. Because before you could build a resort and put up a resort, whether it's Hilton, Hyatt, Magdalena, Sandals, whatever, you have to have an agreement to build a resort. Before you can have an agreement to build a resort, you have to have negotiations to reach that agreement. And those negotiations are what I call the underlying commercial arrangements. And I can tell you something, those negotiations are never discussed in public. It's like they have big people business, they don't discuss in front of the children. So we discuss everything else. We discuss the number of jobs. We discuss the number of nights of parang and limbo and Miss Ivy pepper sauce. We discuss the supplies of fruit and vegetables. We could never get any of them, and by them I mean any of our political leaders, to come and discuss the underlying commercial arrangements. What are the underlying commercial arrangements with Trinidad Hilton? Do you know? How much money did they make last year? You know? How much of that was our money? What is our proportion of that? Do we know? The answer is we don't know. We don't know the figures for Hyatt either, or for Tobago Magdalena. But we're blundering forward, and I'll say it like it is. We're blundering forward to do a fourth one, bigger than all the others, the ones we didn't learn from. So it's a real sobering thing. I have 13 more minutes, and I'm going to make them count. That was just 2 minutes. Now, we actually have two regimes here in terms of tourism development, and they are to be contrasted in terms of learning from what happens in the rest of the Caribbean. In the rest of the Caribbean, the governments quite simply do not have the money to build hotels. So they have a piece of land, and they make the piece of land available to a hotelier. It doesn't matter who the hotelier is, we're discussing a model. And the hotelier will build a hotel. They will design, they will construct, they will fit, they will furnish, they will spend the capital, and they will make the investment to build the hotel. To encourage that investment, the governments in those countries give tax holidays, duty concessions, work permit concessions. That's how that model works in those other countries in the Caribbean. The model in Trinidad and Tobago is completely different. We have two models working side by side in a fundamental tension. On the one hand, we have the Tourism Development Act of 2000, which has attempted to create a framework of incentives to encourage development, yes? 7-year tax holiday and so on and so on. And the news from the experts is that it's had precious little impact in terms of attracting investment. So Trinidad and Tobago, since 2000, has been trying the Caribbean model with very limited success. I think Mr. Louis spoke about the small number of projects we have here compared to the rest of the Caribbean and so on. We can look at those models. The other fact is that the three largest hotels in our country are owned by the state. Okay? And they're owned by the state in the Trinidad Hilton, 1962. Tobago Hilton, now known as Magdalena, 2000 or 2001, according to how you want to count it. And Hyatt Regency in 2008 were all built on land that was publicly owned. They were designed, constructed, fitted, and furnished at our expense with public money. Our model has got nothing to do with the model in the rest of the Caribbean. We have two models working side by side. A model of concessions and tax breaks, which basically has functioned in a very small amount since 2000. And the other model, which continues to enjoy generous support, the Sandals thing is just one example. And it will be back, according to the Chief Secretary, it will be back. Where we spend all of our money to build a resort for somebody else to come and run a resort. And there was some painful testimony. I'm going to delve into my research because the research is not just about transparency and accountability and publishing numbers that nobody else could have get the numbers. It's about making sense of the numbers and having a comparison and a sensible conversation about the numbers. So we have a joint select committee report coming out of Parliament. And the report details a hearing on the 2nd of April of 2016. And the chairman of the session is the independent Senator David Small. And David is questioning the officials at ETEC. And ETEC is the agency that is responsible for Trinidad Hilton. And he's looking at the huge amount of money they've agreed to spend. They've agreed to spend $644 million of our dollars to refurbish Hilton in 2008. It's still going on. And what is more, the CEO of ETEC can't tell the committee when it's going to finish. These are serious things for us to research. And Senator Small, who is financially literate, analyzed the figures ETEC put to him as chairman of that committee. Those figures have been concealed from me. Colleagues, we need to get those figures. I'm making a direct challenge. We need to work together on this. David Small is saying, what is this? Why are we investing this money when I run a discounted cash flow on this? There's a negative rate of return. Why are we investing our money to support Hilton International? Of course, ETEC didn't answer. But it's a very important, it should echo in everybody's brain in here. And anybody who says that this is a model that is working, this is a model that is well understood, this is a model we know about, that is charlatanry of the highest order. It's not working. We don't know enough about it, and we need to do some serious research into it. That's what I want to say. Now, look at Hilton. I'm very pleased that Dr. Jordan Miller made a solid presentation on Hilton, Tobago Hilton. Very important. Tobago Hilton, we borrowed, and by we, I mean there was a company that they established, this Vanguard Limited, with 4 shareholders. There was the state of Trinidad and Tobago. There was Angostura, yeah? There was Guardian Life. They were the ones, Angostura and Guardian, were putting up Tobago plantations. And Hilton had a small thing, about 4 or 5%. Hilton was also a shareholder. They were at the table too. So Vanguard were actually the developers of the project known as Tobago Hilton. So Vanguard borrowed $16.75 million to build the project back in about 99. 8 years later, the project was in a distress sale. The very said Prime Minister, the current Prime Minister, Dr. Rowley, at the time he was Minister of Trade and Industry, Dr. Rowley gave a press conference 27th of March 2008. I won't forget these things. Dr. Rowley gave a press conference, one of the post-cabinet briefings. And Dr. Rowley was expressing the grief that the cabinet, it was Mr. Manning was Prime Minister at the time, the grief that the cabinet had to buy out the private shareholders who had accelerated the demise of the project. I wanted to listen to who the shareholders were, Angostura and Guardian Life, who had accelerated the demise of the project by not contributing in terms of repairs and maintenance and their part of the contract. And Mr. Lockjack could say to us that the state should get the hell out of private business. The same Mr. Lockjack who owns Guardian, you understand me? I want you to understand me, you know. We have to give names, we have to give dates, and we have to give amounts. We have to give a proper account of what has happened in our society. That's what educated, conscientious people do. They have to do proper research and stand for something. And I have tried in my own effort. I would like to challenge our colleagues at the Tobago Tourism Agency, our colleagues at UWI. Let us put our minds together to this thing. I was very shocked to realize that in fact the EIA for the Tobago Plantations Development was never published, which you mentioned, very important point. I want to say that despite the demise of Tobago Hilton, We've never had a serious study of why Tobago Hilton really went down. I cited Dr. Rowley's statement, which is a fact. I didn't make it up. But that's not a conclusive finding. He would have seen certain things I wouldn't have seen. But we have had no serious study from the Lockjack Business School or the responsible professionals or the institutions that should be studying that question. Because it's really the first time we did such a large-scale tourism project in this country. And it failed. And we need to understand why. As it is now, we're going into a third iteration of it. We had a Magdalena iteration after Hilton. We now, I understand, is now a third relationship being brokered with the airline from Canada. I think Sunwing is the airline from Canada that they're brokering a relationship with. There's a third level of relationship being brokered now. And we haven't even understood what went wrong the first time. And we got to understand how serious the deficit of information and understanding is to answer those fundamental questions of whether this is working for us. One of the points that people have echoed, the two speakers who spoke before me, were questions of employment. Both Dr. Jordan Miller and Mr. Lewis mentioned the questions of employment. Those are fundamental questions. Jobs is not a jokey thing. In all of these agreements we have Trinidad Hilton, we have Hyatt Regency, and we have Tobago Hilton, now known as Magdalena. There's only one agreement that's been published, and that is Trinidad Hilton. Possibly by accident, it's available on the Registrar General's website. I've seen it. Now, let me show you how, let's go into a wrinkle. I don't have time to go into all the wrinkles, because the research has been very spotty. People have answered some things and not answered some things, but you get a glimpse of what's going on here in terms of irresponsibility. There are clauses in the Trinidad Hilton agreement that speak directly to the question of training, promotion, and recruitment. They're actually clauses, and I think the clauses, in my experience, are well worded. They speak to the benefit of the public interest in this country, about how people should be recruited, how people should be trained, how people should be promoted within the organization known as Trinidad Hilton. And records are supposed to be kept of that, and so on and so on. So you actually have a commitment, and then you have a commitment to map how the commitment is employed. I write to ETEC under the Freedom of Information Act and ask them, well, could we see the records of that thing that's in the clause? Who was trained, who was promoted, who was retained, who was fired, how has the country functioned? And on 3 occasions I write them, and each time they write it, they tell me they don't understand what I mean. It's like children, it's like 2 years old, and they don't understand what I mean. So they're not actually even enforcing the clauses that are of benefit to the public interest in the agreement. They have no records to show. The records have not been properly maintained, and we have not maintained our place in the race. Okay? I'll go further. So we don't know, and we don't care to know. And I am here in an attempt to offer a challenge to that. So we actually have had statements from the highest level in the country about how these arrangements are working and they're satisfactory and so on and so on and so on. I could tell you all, on the 20th of October of 2016, under the Freedom of Information Act, I wrote to the head of the public service. No, I wrote to the head of the permanent secretary of finance. That was Mr. Maurice Sweet. And I asked Mr. Sweet whether there'd be any management reviews or audits of the state-owned hotels. I wrote to Mr. Sweet because, you might wonder, why is he writing to finance? Because there's an instrument in Trinidad and Tobago, an institution called Corporation Sole, where all the shares of all the state enterprises sit in Corporation Sole. That's where the power of the shareholder resides in the Ministry of Finance through that instrument. And Sweet could write back to me within the 30 days, 10th of November 2016, Sweet could write back to me. And I have the letter to say to me, no, Mr. Raymond, we never did any audit, and we never did any management review of any of the state-owned hotels. So we don't know, and we don't care to know. But that's not the punchline. The punchline is, a few months later, Sweet was promoted, and he became the head of the public service. So when Dr. Rowley and Minister Young, who is a minister in the office of the Prime Minister, could be coming on the TV to tell us the arrangements are good. And the arrangement is working. How is it good if you didn't measure it? How is it working if you didn't measure it? Did PS Sweet, as a professional, as a man who's a qualified accountant, tell the Prime Minister? Did he brief the cabinet? We are playing with serious nonsense here. And again, I'm throwing out the challenge to colleagues here. I've been doing the research. I've been doing the research with some support. We need to get more hands on board. This is a serious piece of research. If we are going to embark on more tourism projects, we need to do so from an informed perspective. Okay? The final point I want to make is that, in fact, the Tobago sandals debacle, fiasco, would not have happened if we'd had a more informed conversation going on over the existing 3 hotels. Okay? Our basis for decision making is not fact-based. So in fact, anybody, doesn't matter who's the current incumbent, anybody can get up and tell us anything, because it's a question of political loyalty. And we have to get a little more serious than that. We had 60 years of public education. It's our country. Nobody coming to rescue us. We have to sort this stuff out for ourselves. These are a few considerations. Whatever we have to do, we have to do it from an informed perspective. Thank you for the support. Thank you for the attention. And thanks to the colleagues from UE. Thank you.